Today, we'll talk about Ukraine through the eyes of social media.
Then, hackers on both sides are fighting a cyber war.
And the global political situation, how Trump's support of Putin is leaving him ostracized.
I'm Laura Fitton, and this is Future Forward.
I am Stephen Rosenbaum. Let us launch. Hey, Laura, good morning.
Hey, good morning. How are you doing, Steve?
You know, I'm an eternal optimist, and I'm hopeful that people that listen to this pod will come away, as I have, thinking that we're in a really terrible moment, but that there's at least one version of the outcome that's pretty positive. And so let me see if I can convince you and some of our listeners of that.
I'm gonna scoop up some of that optimism. I am such a Cold War kid, and this is bringing back a lot of feelings.
So we're going to do 3 chapters. We're going to do social media first, then we'll do hackers and tech, and then if we have time, we'll do politics. But as we were getting ready to go on the pod, we discovered a surprising alignment in our lives that both of us, at critical times in our life, were in Moscow.
And times in Moscow's evolution. I am shocked you were there in 1983. If you had, well, even if were you telling me this morning that Americans could study journalism in Moscow in 1983, I was completely shocked to hear that.
So it was my senior year in college, and I was an English major. And I remember the course being offered. It was 8 weeks studying journalism in the Soviet Union. And what I remember most vividly was the plane landing and getting off the plane and getting on the bus. And as we pulled into Moscow, I looked out the window and I saw a woman walking with a dog. And I was stunned that they had dogs in Russia, or women, or streets, or cars. And it was a city, and it looked not very different than my city. And I've never forgotten how little visibility I had prior to landing there of just what went on in the daily life. And you were there not in 83, you were there 10 years later.
Yeah. I was there in 94, which I would have said was one of the first moments Americans could go live in Russia. And yet here we are. I did know, so my high school was one of the first 20 or so that had exchange with Russia. And so a lot of my friends had gone. Of course, it wasn't Russia. It was actually Lviv, where the students went, and we had a bunch of students from Lviv come to us. That was in like 88, 89. I actually didn't study Russian, so I didn't go on that. But then right after college, I had friends living over there and running a kind of informal journalism, photography business, and they were able to help me get over. And that was kind of my year abroad. I had done 2 on-campus or off-campus programs already, so I couldn't do a year abroad as well during college. So I went right after. And it was the Wild West. It was very violent. There seemed like there was a car bombing every day. One night we woke up to a huge loud noise, and it turned out someone had taken anti-aircraft artillery into the courtyard of our apartment building in Kutuzovsky and fired into an apartment across the way, right? I mean, just crazy stuff was going on. It was, but yeah, that same, seeing their humanity, I can't convince my kids quite to understand how abstract and monolithic the Iron Curtain and USSR and everything seemed to us. Yeah. And yeah, similar sense of like, wow, just normal human people living their normal lives.
And let's jump into the social media conversation, because I think it's fascinating. And let's begin with this story from Vice. So Russia is now restricting access to Facebook, and a number of other social media players as well. I guess my question is, unlike China, where we know there is, a real blockade of the internet, can the Soviet Union, Russia, or Putin in this case, can Putin really legitimately stop the fair access to world information from his citizenry at this point?
I mean, I think he can certainly slow it down, and he is highly incentivized to, because so much of his support, for probably decades now, is based on disinformation, right? And so the specific issue at discussion in this article is look, Facebook is cutting down on my disinfo outlets, so I'm going to cut down on Facebook. To the extent the average ordinary Russian can access ways that help cut through that disinformation, he just wants to slow them all down. Of course.
Um, and then, you know, on the other hand, you know, just so that we don't try and be naive and paint social media with a great big smiley face, you know, there is an enormous amount of fake information being published. Instagram is this article from Input, but there's lots of options of visibility into people just literally taking old World War II video and pasting it onto and saying this is happening now. I mean, and I will say, because I've looked at a lot of this stuff, it's hard for me to discriminate between people that are trying to purposefully mislead and people that are just screwing around, like think it's kind of neat to play
Yeah.
with the toys, which
Yeah.
is, you know.
As I read through that point so landed, because I started thinking, oh, it's so easy to tell the disinformation accounts, you know, if they're recent, if they're this, if they're that. And it describes this kid in Kentucky who thinks he's the good guy, who you know, has been building up these accounts over time, getting huge followings, and then changing the name and content to something else. Right. So you just have to be very, very careful which sources you're trusting. And he even comes out and says, like, I'm just trying to get eyeballs. Like, what's the big deal? Maybe this is real. And I think he knows it's not real. But you know, it is tough. It is tough. People have to be really discerning consumers. Look for known sources, look for knowable people, verified accounts. Be very, very careful whose fundraisers you retweet and amplify. Yeah, it's pretty
but
wild.
but adding that level of skepticism into consumption of information is exhausting, right? I mean, for average people who have kids in school and have to pay the rent and have to like go to work and, you know, clean the house and clean out the litter box or whatever they have to do, like to on top of that have to look at every single thing that comes across their feed and be suspicious is just, you know, it's just exhausting is the word I keep thinking of. It's just like
It is real labor. It is real emotional labor. But unfortunately, we have to do this, especially if we're going to amplify. If you're
well,
just reading and want to be a casual consumer, that's one thing. But if you're going to actually retweet, engage, share, forward, weigh in with your comments, you got to be savvy.
so in 2017, I gave a TED talk about fake news, and it was on the main stage at the TED HQ. And I opened with pictures of Russia that I had taken. I should find it and share it at some point. I'll put it in the show notes.
Nice.
I opened with my photographs of Moscow, and I talked about my conversation with a Russian journalist. And he invited me out, and I spoke broken Russian and he spoke broken English. And we ended up in his flat drinking a bottle of what I thought was really kind of egregiously over flavored lemon vodka. And what I'll never forget was him saying to me very late at night after we both had too much to drink, the difference, I'm not going to pretend to do a Russian accent, but he said the difference between Americans and Russians is we know not to believe what we read. And you Americans, you believe what you read and think it's the truth. And, you know, I've literally, those words echo in my head because, you know, we do, so you've got these kind of naive American news consumers who are now being flooded with disinformation on both sides. And they're like,
Yeah. And disinformation is just such an elevated art form with this particular regime and has been for so long. And when they target us, right, go back to our elections and all the kinds of things that have been going on, they look for places to break us apart, right? Race has always been a huge, you know, like Black people are targeted by Russian disinformation in ways that you can't even imagine, right? And have always been. They try and get in there and find those wedge issues, and then they flood the internet with bots, with content, with spammers who will amplify it. And you know, there's just a hugely, yeah, It's I don't even have words for how bad Russian disinformation is and how long it's been going on and how many of us have been duped by it on some level or another.
Yeah.
So much of the radicalizing of the American right has been done directly from Moscow. And we talk about it a little bit, but I don't think we talk about it enough.
No, and in fact, so there's an article that's going to be in the show notes from Politico, and the headline is "Social Media Platforms on the Defensive as Russian-Based Disinformation About Ukraine Spreads." The thing I find fascinating is when you think about disinformation regarding COVID, I mean, in some ways that's like table stakes easy. You know, ivermectin, false, take it down, next, boom. There's Bill Gates is planting a chip in your arm, false, take it down. Like the really egregious garbage, you could have an algorithm just search for a keyword and be looking for it. But the question about how Ukrainians feel and how Russians feel and what it feels like on the street and what it feels like in Russia, like those, I think the social media folks are going to have a much harder time uh, managing, because arguably it is opinion. Someone in Ukraine says they think they want the country to be taken over by Russia. I bet there is somebody you could find who would say those words, right?
Oh, yeah,
So,
of course there is, right?
right.
There's
So that's not fake.
yeah.
It's just not accurate.
Who gets amplified? What cultural touch point trigger issues get amplified? It's really tough. Hey, while we're talking Ukraine and social media, if I'm the victim of a disinformation campaign, then I will eat my words later. But I am really, really impressed by the official accounts, especially on Twitter, because everything's Twitter in my world, right? Ukraine and the president, Zelensky, they are both killing it on Twitter, doing a great job of getting information out, trying to get messages directly to the Russian people about who they are and what they stand for, consistently countering the Russian disinformation they're hearing by saying, no, look, I'm here on the street. Here I am with half the cabinet. Here's who each of these are. You got the guy behind him holding up his phone to show what time it is. They're very, very savvy, and I'm glad, because it's helping me keep abreast. And again, I hope it's as honest as it seems to be. But mad props to them on, they're even putting out information. I think their pinned post yesterday was how to counter disinformation. Right? They seem to be very transparent. They seem to be very forthright, and they definitely understand how to use these tools well.
So I'd read somewhere that when Russian troops are being captured, they're all these mostly young kids, and the Ukrainians are calling their parents. Is that did you hear that?
Again, I heard this, and I hope it's not disinfo. I hope this one's real, because I absolutely loved it. It touched the mother in me, but it also touched the oh, that is a very smart strategy. The tweet was that 200 Russian soldiers had been captured. And they like you said, they were like mostly 19, mostly ill prepared. Again, is that propaganda? Is that real? I don't know. But the technique that was reported was that they were calling their parents. The captors were saying, here's your kid, right? So that gets you goodwill, right? We're not throwing your son in a dungeon or your daughter in a dungeon. We are calling you and letting you know they're safe. It also gives them a chance to reach out directly to the Russian people, to hear the contrast between what they've been hearing from Putin about who the Ukrainians are, to, like, hey, here's who we are. We have your child. We're taking care of them. They're safe, right? Like that's amazing. And it got me thinking, like, we do all this phone banking and text banking around elections. Is there a place to sign up to like just text bank or phone bank the average Russian family and just say like, hi, here's who we are? Obviously, language barrier would be a huge issue, but I don't know, maybe we call them and we just play that tape of the president addressing the Russian people, the Ukraine president. I don't know.
I like that idea, and I think we all have internet connections. At least everyone who's listening to this pod does, and we all have some spare time, I hope. I also think, again, I started this out. I confessed at the top that I'm going to be optimistic, which will put me in the outlier class of the current mood of my friends and neighbors. But I think that, I don't know if you saw, but Saturday Night Live last night, the cold open was the New York-based Ukrainian chorus. No joke, no humor, no performance, no silly, just music and a beat. And I was like, all right, there you go. I mean, like how we touch Americans' hearts so that we align and we understand these are real people dealing, their homes are being destroyed for, best as I can tell, no foreseeable good reason. And so that puts people like Google in this really interesting kind of problem because, on one hand, YouTube is very popular among pro-Kremlin broadcasters and critics. It has a lot, and I mean, do you want to be the executive sitting there looking at 175 channels and saying, delete that one, don't delete that one? I mean, what do you do with RT.com, Russia Today? I mean, it's a Russian propaganda network.
It is an overwhelming problem, especially because you've got, at least here in the US, you've got all these American businesses whose ads are going to run during that content.
Yeah.
Boy, I do not want to be that person who has to pick through all that and figure out what's real and what isn't, but it's incredibly important. Media is very powerful. Russia and the Soviet Union before it have always known that and have always used it, very tightly, you might say with an iron fist.
And, again, different than China, right? I mean, I don't know the math. So, someone feel free to jump in the comments and tell me if I get the math wrong. But it seems to me that for Google to bonk heads with Russia certainly is very different than the line they walk with the Chinese government. I mean,
well, and yet another line thrown into the mix is, with our sanctions now, they are forbidden from providing services, goods, or technology, right? So are they providing technology to aid Russia if they keep platforming all this propaganda? So I know Facebook, made that big announcement that they were going to crack down a bit more. And there was this wonderful debate about like, oh, is Facebook finally getting a conscience? Or is this just simply like they legally have to now because of the sanctions? A lot of really interesting stuff going on in that dynamic.
Yeah. And by the way, to your point earlier of like Zelensky wisely using social media, I mean, Ukraine is calling on the hacker underground to defend against Russia. I mean, they're and there was that Elon Musk tweet yesterday saying that Starlink is available in the Ukraine and that they were shipping in new platforms. I guess that kind of puzzled me because it strikes me that I don't know how you from a satellite point at certain countries and not at others, but what was it not available before they turned it on? I don't know. I mean, that being said, I'll take everybody who's got that kind of footprint who wants to be pro-Ukraine. So yeah. I also think, the U.S. has said already, and is, I mean, there is no doubt that the next, whatever it is, the next shot, assuming it's not nuclear, is going to be some kind of a cyber attack in the U.S.
I mean, there have been cyber attacks going on in the US for so long, right? And there were, I mean, we do need the hackers, like you said, on both sides because they're going to use theirs. And if we're not countermanding that and being smart about keeping our passwords updated, we talked about that last week's show about security and how important it is. It is triply important. Update all your software, update your firmware, update your passwords. Keep on top of things because we know they're good at this. We know they're going to want to do it. And, it's so hard as an armchair quarterback to really know how things are actually going over there, to know what to believe and to know what Putin is going to do next. But this is a no-brainer that this would be on the table and it would be a very active, underway thing.
And worth remembering that, like for example, a DDoS attack is not a sophisticated hack. Taking a bunch of machines and pointing them all at your server and just overwhelming it with garbage traffic. This is a high school level hack. This is not a complicated hack, and very hard to guard against.
I think the things that go through my head the most this week is just like, let's take huge steps back and start thinking as a global culture, not just any individual country. What makes all this aggression possible? Where's the money coming from? Where's the power coming from? And you know what I'm leading to here? It's
Vodka.
oil. It's oil.
Yeah.
The Russian economy, Russian exports, the first four top exports are, three versions of petroleum and coal. And if you believe in, if you don't believe in climate for any given reason, just that one thing alone should be a huge incentive. You have countries like Netherlands and Germany are two of the highest consumers of Russian oil. Europe, energy is a human right. Energy is incredibly important for equity, for human safety and life. And this idea that we have dragged our heels for 30 years at building more resilient, safe, equitable, and renewable sources of energy, it's just got to end. It's just got to end, because we can't have superpowers wielding this kind of, leverage over the entire world that lets them get away with things like this invasion.
You know who's been quiet, or at least I haven't heard, maybe it's someone else has, like, where are the Saudis on this?
I don't think they've been that quiet. Aren't they one of the few that were, like India, China, Saudi, and UAE were sort of like, we're not going to go with the rest of the world in condemning this. The other direct dangers, I haven't seen the full report of the the environmental fallout of it yet, but the Russians ignited a pipeline, I believe I'm not going to get the city name right. It wasn't Kyiv. It was the other major city that starts with a K. And that was now burning, right? And methane is incredibly dangerous. But also, again, I can't cook dinner at night without methane because I still haven't electrified my stove, which is ridiculous. But if they come in and they start blowing up these facilities, it's an environmental disaster and it's also a humanitarian disaster. And they're very well versed at how all these things work because it used to be theirs, right? They still have all that knowledge from when Ukraine was a Soviet territory. So yeah, some really scary stuff. Sorry, I'm glad you're
no. So here's a story I didn't understand. Patreon is suspending the donation page for a not-for-profit that's giving body armor to the Ukrainian army.
Yeah.
I read this twice trying to understand, and this not-for-profit has been around since 2014.
Right. We know they're legitimate. They have a humanitarian mission. Where they're running afoul of Patreon's contract in terms of service is it is still considered military equipment, and they forbid fundraising for that. Boy, that one is frustrating.
So this is the quote from Patreon: does not allow campaigns involved in violence or purchasing of military equipment, regardless of their cause, a company spokesperson said. We are investigating because of representatives on their donation page for how the representations on their donation page of how the funds will be used. We have suspended the campaign in question while we investigate. If the page is ultimately removed, our policy is to send the creator the remaining funds or refund all pledges.
But they've already been refunding pledges. And it's just so troubling. If this organization is as legitimate as it seems to be, didn't just pop up this week, and we know that there are a ton of volunteers, the lines at the border crossing are going both ways, right? Because you have Ukrainian expats trying to get back in the country to go serve. You have non-military people just picking up arms and getting trained, and they don't have any body armor. So yeah, I think that's a really tough call. I was disappointed to see it. I don't know what I would do if I was in Patreon's seat, if that really is their policy.
I mean, I think the answer is if that really is their policy, again, this gets back to my larger question, which is, do people at these organizations, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Google or Patreon, really want to be the arbiters of good organization, bad organization, good war, bad war? So if someone put up another page that offered to send body armor to the Russian soldiers, that puts Patreon in a position where they have to decide what side of the conflict they're on.
Right. Who gets the armor? It's I get it. I get it. It's not an easy thing.
So let's talk about sanctions for a minute. So, the media is reporting the sanctions. I have to say, I don't think that the Biden administration has been communicating very clearly. I think it comes off like we're going to send them a really nasty note. And I wish they would communicate more clearly, like the Swift bank sanctions. Like governments don't survive on their own economies. The whole world trades. You have oil, I need beef, or you have oil, I need wheat, or whatever. Like all of these trades happen across borders. They happen over banking systems. You know, I guess the question is, I mean, if I said to you, hey, Laura, you're not going to have any income for the next month, 3 months, 12 months, 24, there's a number at which you say, I run out of money, and it doesn't matter what it is, but that's you know broadly what you so you cut your costs and you consolidate a little bit, but at the end of the day, that really. So the question is, if Biden pushes all these buttons with an international coalition and nobody steps in to replace that funding, when do the actual Russian people feel it on the street?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the nuances about the SWIFT sanction that's not being well communicated is that they did seem to design it in a way that it will hit the oligarchs and the government harder than it will hit the ordinary people, right? So Russia's central bank is not completely cut off from SWIFT, but there are some adjustments, some sanctions in, what it can and can't do. I believe the intention behind this from the international community, and it took, it's certainly not something the US did on our own. It took a long time to get those last few countries on board. Germany was holding out, Hungary was holding out, I think Italy was the other one. They tried to at least design it in a way that it wouldn't hit the Russian people nearly as hard as it would hit these, super wealthy people. I know people are also debating whether the property seizures, right, grab their yachts, grab their offshore bank accounts for Russian super elite are the right thing to do or not. I'm not going to debate that. I think it's a great idea. I think the oil money in Russia has always worried me from when I lived there onward. The people in Russia who had the power when I was there in 94 had so much money. The average Russian was just absolutely starving. You had pensioners, the currency was devaluing so quickly. You had pensioners going through dumpsters. I had a taxi driver who had, helped design the navigation system for Sputnik. And now he was driving cabs because it was the only way he could make any money. And yet all these nightclubs would open with a $50 cover charge, which was just insane money, even for me as an American, recent college grad living there, but was just unbelievable. So you had this incredible wealth inequality. And that has always been a strong corrupting force in that nation. And, again, I'm an environmentalist, so I'm always going to point to oil and blame oil. I'm sure it's much more nuanced than that. But the super wealthy in Moscow and all of Russia are so much wealthier than everybody else that, they're the people you do need to apply pressure to because they're the only people who could shut Putin up.
The billionaires in the UK, the Russian oligarchs in the UK, it's a startling number of
London grad.
Yeah, London grad.
Yeah.
And I thought this story was interesting. Roman Abramovich gives up control of Chelsea. If you actually read below the headline, not clear that he really gave up anything. He still owns it. He's giving up operational control. But think about it this way. So, Donald Trump has a phone. Certain people have access to that number and they call him. Presumably Putin has that same bat phone. And within his community, there are, pick a number, 10, 50, 100 people who are on a first name basis with him and who have influence. And they're all calling. And they're saying, hey, listen, this freezing our assets, this taking our apartments thing, we're not okay with this. Like, make it stop.
I hope so. I hope to deity. So
yeah,
no, alternatives are just too scary.
All right, so we have just a few minutes left. So, which brings me to talking about Trump, because we have to. So the Republicans are trying to figure out how to be anti-Biden, anti-Putin, pro-strongman, pro. It's like everyone's like trying to figure, and basically, I think what they've determined, Trump aside, I think what they've determined is they'll just wait until there's an outcome, and whatever the outcome is, they'll just come out against it.
Yeah, there's a big asterisk on that anti-Putin, right? Because just
Yeah.
2 days ago, you have Tucker Carlson like still praising the guy, or maybe 3 days ago now. I mean, it's just
And Trump today. I mean, by the way, not to confuse issues, but this phrase "strongman," like, if you chose to have that role, what would they call you a strongman? Or would they, because you don't hear strong woman used in the same, is it a male, macho, anti-feminist position? Like,
well, that's a total tangent. I mean,
it is. Sorry.
Hung up on, for years, there's been this whisper rumor about like, hey, who made Trump's debts go away? Who's been bankrolling him all this time? Is he involved in Russian money laundering? Like, whoever has the receipts on that, whoever has the tax returns, whoever has the facts behind all that speculation, this would be an amazing time for it to come out.
Yeah.
I have just scratched my head for so many years. Like, how is this all working? Where is the money coming from?
All right. We're going to pause there. Optimistic note. My fingers are crossed that the alignment of the sanctions, the growth of social media voices, the real people on the street in Russia who are like, explain to me why we're attacking our neighbor who's done nothing to us, could coalesce into actually a drumbeat. Now, that could paint Putin into a corner who does something even more horrible. But, I'm going to end this sunny day thinking that the next couple of days you're going to start to see a pullback.
Let's hope this is Putin's undoing. Let's hope it.
We are out of time. Have a good week.
Take care. Stay safe and take care of yourselves.
All right.